The impulse that led to the sit-in movement had been growing for some time, and it was the Negro college students in Nashville and in other cities who would bring it into action. The background of these students was a religious one, and in addition, many of them had been inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi as applied by the Reverend Martin Luther King. A few of the students had prepared to put theory into practice by attending workshops in which they rehearsed for the ordeal they would have to undergo when they began sitting in at white lunch counters.
When an idea is something I've never heard of, I like to explore and see what it really is. So I went to this workshop, and on this particular night, they were having some role playing. And in some of the scenes, you almost cried because they would have someone playing the part of
nigger. Nigger. Now, let's play
These sort of comments, they touch to your soul, and they make you realize that it's all the more important that you do something about it. February 13th was our first sit-in Nashville. On the sit-in, we had about 130 kids. I think on this day, many of us didn't realize just how important our movement would grow to be.
The targets of the Nashville students were the lunch counters at the city's 2 largest department stores and 4 variety stores. And for the first time, the community was confronted with Negroes in places where they had never been.
You go to a counter. You do not request that the person sitting next to you get up and leave. You merely come in and sit down beside him, as any human being would do. You cause no violence. You have no angry words. You're friendly, and it sort of helps to project the idea that here sits beside me another human being.
Altogether, it was a moving feeling within me that I was sitting there demanding a God-given right, and my soul became satisfied that I was right in what I was doing. At the same time, was something deep down within me, moving me, that I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system, that I had to be maladjusted to it. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service, who stared at me.
During the weeks after the sit-ins began, opposition in the white communities of the South solidified, and the first signs of violence appeared. Those few whites who sympathized publicly with the sit-ins soon found themselves to be prime targets. One of these was a young divinity student in Nashville, Wilson Yates.
Well, I was downtown with a friend around Memorial Square. I'd actually gone back to put a nickel in the meter. My car happened to be parked by Memorial Square where the picketing was going on. And suddenly, we moved into a different world. There were the crowds shouting, "Niggers go home," and then there were the Negro students who were carrying posters asking for equal opportunity. And being thrown in the situation of the crisis, I had to act, and I had no other choice than to respond as I did. So I walked over and I asked the Negroes if it would help or harm if I carried a poster. They said it would help. Right before I went over, some white boys had entered the ring carrying derogatory posters like "Go home, coon," and "Send the bunnies home." And I entered the ring and I started walking around. I was with a friend. One of the white boys walked over to this friend. He said something to him, And then the momentum began to build from the crowd, and they said, hit the nigger lover, hit the nigger lover. And then there's that strange, long, lonely feeling where you're waiting for something to happen, and you don't know what's going to happen, but somehow down deep you're ready for it. And he walked up behind me. He hit me in the back of the neck. I lurched forward, but I didn't fall. I regained my balance, and then in the midst of it, with the shouting and the jeering and the crowd of people, I suddenly felt this tremendous humiliation. Suddenly I had crossed into another race. I moved into a different world. I was a Negro feeling all of the rejection and humiliation he must have to go through every time he's rejected.
On the morning of the 27th, this was to be our first real violent day. It was the first time when we could really test our own convictions as far as nonviolent means were concerned. 5 ministers said to us, if you go downtown today, you're going to be arrested. Please don't go downtown, because we're not prepared. We should have community behind us. Paul Pratt, he was one of the few white students who were with us. They always pick on the white students because they hate to see white sympathizers.
I saw a bunch of coloreds sitting on the stools. They looked like a bunch of idiots sitting up there waiting for people to try to throw them off, and they looked like they were just trying to egg on a fight.
None of us looked back, but yet we could see everything that was going on through the long mirror. And it seems to me that when it happened, that all of us wanted to be hit. This was an experience that we needed to keep our movement going, to keep ourselves going, and to convince ourselves that we really were nonviolent.
Until the arrest of the 80 students, the sit-ins in Nashville had involved only a relatively small segment of the city's 100,000 Negroes. But now, on February 29th, as the trial of the students began, the entire Negro population would soon find itself involved. Judge Harris fined each of the students $50. A few days later, most of the fines were paid in order to appeal the decision, an appeal which is still unresolved. But at the time of sentencing, as the students were confronted with the choice of paying a $50 fine or spending over a month in jail, each of them chose jail. Their attitude reflected the words of Reverend Martin Luther King, who in a speech made in Nashville at the time said, "We will meet the capacity to inflict suffering with the capacity to endure suffering. We will say, do what you will to us, but we will wear you down."
Student sit-ins in Nashville certainly did arouse this community. I think not only were the people of the Negro community bewildered, that is, the total community bewildered, but this question of what can I do in this situation certainly preyed on the minds of people. And of course, one of the things that did come out of it was the discovery, so to speak, of their effective economic purchasing power, and that they could use this to support the students.
The Negro has a terrific purchasing power. Their standard of living and their earning power has been increased tremendously, I would say, in the last 10 or 15 years. And they have a large amount of money to be spent now, and they spend it very, very fluently. So the merchants, of course, was feeling the pinch because they were definitely not coming downtown to spend that money. The uptown streets were absolutely forsaken of any Negroes.
Early on the morning of April 19th, the violence in Nashville reached its climax with the dynamiting of a Negro home. This was the residence of Alexander Luby, a city councilman and leading Negro attorney.
He was Attorney Luby. He was our lawyer. He came to our defense when we were arrested that day, when we really needed something. And somebody had tried to kill him. We felt we had to confront the mayor with this thing. At first we didn't know quite what to do, but the idea of the massive walk seemed to emerge from everybody's mind, really. It was a spontaneous sort of thing. And we walked, we held our heads high because we were right. And we knew we were walking for something right. We were really striding toward freedom. It was a wonderful feeling. It was magnificent. We felt unity, we felt power, we felt strength. And it's not very often that a human being is exposed to such a raw feeling of goodness. I don't think any of us will ever forget it. Here was a situation in which two forces were meeting head on, and there had to be a showdown. He had to say something.
Well, I felt like that here were a group of youngsters that were outraged because their leader's home had been dynamited. And I felt outraged along with them. And to that extent, we had a community of feeling between us that made me have a feeling that really we were after the same thing, and that I was as outraged as they were by this horrible thing, and that the great majority of the thinking white people were outraged by such a thing. We just couldn't let a thing like that happen.
The confrontation at City Hall marked the turning point in Nashville. Soon afterward, a committee of merchant and student representatives met and worked out a plan for desegregating the 6 lunch counters that had been the targets of the sit-ins. The economic boycott was withdrawn, and Nashville became the first major city in the South to permit whites and Negroes to eat together in public places. The Nashville settlement was studied closely by other communities. By midsummer, a total of 27 cities had opened their lunch counters to all customers. There have been no disorders as a result, and none of the merchants affected has reported any loss in business. But the chain reaction started by the sit-ins is far from complete. In the winter and early spring of 1960, the efforts of Nashville's Negro college students had led to the integration of lunch counters at 6 department and variety stores. But they were still excluded from eating at the city's downtown drugstores and restaurants, train depot, and a bus terminal. And on November 2nd, only a few weeks ago, they began to march downtown again to launch a new round of sit-ins that are still going on.